after I finished watching yesterday's trailer and I recorded that reaction, I went in my kitchen. I went onto social media, X, Twitter. I saw everyone's mainly positive reactions. There was a few negative Nellies, but mostly people were excited for the trailer. I was just sitting there by the kitchen table, scratching my head, because I was actually really surprised and blown away and shocked by what I just saw. And I didn't know how to feel about it. And you saw my reaction yesterday. I wasn't really reacting while I was watching the trailer because I was surprised. I was floored. It took me by surprise. And once I finished watching it, we had a chat, didn't we? I told you what I thought about the trailer. I gave you my initial thoughts, and then I went away and I told you I had to sleep on it. And I did. There were certain things I told you I didn't like. There's mostly things I told you that I did like, right? So we need to get into how I feel about this trailer today. But not just the trailer, everything we've seen thus far. James Gunn has dealt with certain issues within the Superman character and mythology that people have criticised in the past. For example, people have always made fun of the Clark Kent, Clark Kent putting on his glasses and that being a disguise, right? And for me, as a kid, it was just me. I just went with it. I used my imagination, right? That's the whole thing with storytelling. But he's changed. He's made Clark Kent look dramatically different to Superman. That can only be a good thing. And then, in the beginning of yesterday's trailer, we saw this wonderful interview between Lois Lane and Superman. Clark has actually asked her to interview him. Now he thinks because he's so naive, because he is naive, he thinks they're going to play. She's going to do a light and fluffy interview, then they're probably going to go to bed and make love or something, right? And Clark is so surprised by the serious nature that, the serious nature she treats this interview in. Well, you don't know Lois Lane very well, do you, Clark? Rachel is being totally Lois Lane here. The dialogue that Gunn has delivered is totally Lois Lane. He totally gets who this character is. Brosnahan totally gets who this character is. This is Lois Lane. Grace Randolph said a very interesting thing, that Brosnahan seems the most Lois Lane since Terry Hatcher and Margot Kidder, and she made a very bold claim that the other live-action Lois Lanes weren't that good, that she didn't like them. Amy Adams was an interesting Lois Lane, where she's a great actress who was playing a Lois Lane that kind of felt like Lois Lane in Man of Steel, kind of behaved like Lois Lane in Batman vs Superman, and then in the Snyder Cut was just crying about Superman. Like, if you watch the first animated The Death of Superman, Lois is going out there trying to expose Lex Luthor and stuff. She's still being Lois Lane, but she's devastated about Superman's death. And I think Lois should have been a bit more Lois in the Snyder Cut rather than so weepy, just sitting around. That's not really who Lois Lane is. But there you have it. Amy Adams is a great actress, and that's the version of Lois Lane that they gave us. I think Erica Durance is an outstanding, in Smallville, is an outstanding version of Lois. Grace was being really kind of hateful and mocking to Smallville. Look, the woman, I don't want to talk about it. She's like Marmite. She has good takes and bad takes. But anyway, I digress. But that scene was amazing, right? But to my shock, it wasn't that Lois Lane was being so Lois Lane. It's Clark's reaction. I want to talk about this because this is very interesting. He's very shouty. He loses his temper with Lois. I was trying to save people's lives. He's passionate. He defends his position. Now, is this the clone Superman? Has he been infected by kryptonite? Or is this how Clark Kent's going to be in this film? without the context of seeing the film, we simply don't know. I like the idea of Clark being this passionate and defending his position. Again, James Gunn has attempted to fix something that's been labelled against Clark Kent and Superman from the word go, that he's just too boring, right? So here you see him being passionate. Gunn, maybe if it's not the clone, if he's not being infected by kryptonite and Gunn's not trying to do, God forbid, making him a toxic male, and I don't think that he is, by the way, he's tried to inject personality into Clark Kent and Superman. I wrote a screenplay many, many years ago, and I was saying to people, one of the things you have to do with Superman is make him a little bit more Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark. Not totally, but you do have to amp up the personality. Now and again, a one-liner wouldn't be so bad from Superman. But this passion from Clark is fantastic by James Gunn. It's a bold move. Some people already complaining about it, and even I thought to myself, and I think I mentioned it in my trailer reaction yesterday, this is not very meek, this is not very mild, because that's how Superman was created to be. He was the meek as Clark Kent. He was the mild as Clark Kent. And even Superman was kind of a meek persona, even though he's got all these powers and he goes around stopping villains and saving people's lives. He does it in a peaceful manner. Now, this is a Superman, a Clark Kent, that seems to be very, very passionate about what he's doing. I really, really like what Gunn's doing with this. So one of my complaints for weeks now is that we don't know the premise of this film. We don't know what this film truly is. I think we can say now we know. Now, a lot of people have kind of seen, what's going on here and have said, this seems like very Man of Steel, but especially this seems like they're using a lot of the themes from Batman versus Superman while using popping colours, a little bit of humour and a bit more of a mainstream tone. That they're using the same kind of storytelling, right? The fact that Superman has gone to another country, as he did in BVS at the beginning of the film when he saves Lois Lane and everyone's turning against him, it's a similar thing. But Gunn is going about this in a very different way. For example, there wasn't retribution. No one came from that country and attacked Metropolis. But in James Gunn's Superman, the hammer of Baravia has come to Metropolis. People are going to get hurt, probably going to die because of Superman's actions. This is the very thing that Lois Lane has pointed out to Superman in that wonderful interview. Now, I was watching a reaction from Jeremy Prime from Geeks and Gamers, and he started all this, why is she talking down to him? Look, mate, I don't know how you treat your missus, but this is two people on an equal footing. Any relationship needs the space, the freedom to disagree. Now, I don't know if your missus trembles when you walk in, son. I don't know. But she's not talking down to him. She really is trying to help him. She's basically putting him in a pressured position and saying, right, people have turned on you. This is serious. And Superman is not taking it that seriously. I stopped a war. There's a little bit of arrogance in his tone, if you like. So that's why I'm saying, is this just the typical attitude of a year one Superman? Is this the clone? It could be the clone, by the way. We don't know when in the movie this is, because I think Lois does start interacting with the clone in the movie without knowing it's the clone. By the way, the clone could be the one who actually goes to Baravia, if that's the place where that he saves as well. I'm just making that assumption because of the hammer of Baravia, but who knows? Anyway, and so yeah, it could be the clone doing these things. So it's very, very, very interesting. But a lot of Snyder fans have come out and have freeze-framed Superman getting angry and then comparing it to Superman screaming when he kills Zod, something that should never have happened. By the way, David Goyer wanted Superman to be a killer, so he basically wrote him into a corner, right? That cost the film around $300-400 million, right? And that moment was never referenced again in any movie. You know, he never regretted it. He never said, I'm never going to kill again because I know what it feels like killing, which is what he should have done. Maybe if Goya did a Man of Steel 2, that would have happened, as we've discussed many times. But anyway, they were trying, they were trying their best. The reality is, more people loved this trailer than hated it. The reality is, I believe that this film is going to make money. I've had my doubts in the past. I've raised some red flags, but the themes are very interesting. That interview is brilliant, and some people saying, and saying us as Snyder fans were saying all of a sudden, well, look at this positive interview in the 78 movie, and, look at Superman shouting at Lois. It's so disrespectful. It's not disrespectful, by the way. It's passion for being a protector, for being a hero. He's passionate. He wanted to help those poor people being victimized in that conflict. This is brilliant that this version of Superman is so passionate about protecting people and saving people's lives. But isn't it ironic that Snyder fans are using a film they keep on telling us we should move on from? By the way, I'm never moving on from the greatest version of Superman, the greatest Superman movie of all time. Just like I'm never moving on from The Wizard of Oz and every classic film I grew up watching. All right, but anyway, so it's great that Superman's passionate. I like that. I think it's very, very interesting, but we don't know the context of where he's really coming from, if that's really Superman or if it's a clone. Lex Luthor is very, very angry in this version, and he clearly hates him. He's jealous of him. You can see the jealousy. Superman's getting all the attention, and he doesn't like it. I love that. Nicholas Hoult is going to own this role. And, Nicholas Hoult mainly plays nicey, erratic characters. So this is kind of an interesting challenge for Nick. But he can pull it off because he's a great actor. And Gunn likes to pick people that he can work with. There's no question about that. No divas on a Gunn set. It's a very close-knit set. And if you go and see the BTS of a Gunn movie, you'll see that there's no messing about. He doesn't like people. He doesn't like divas, and I can't blame him. You can't work within those parameters. So Clark, Superman and Lois have been brilliantly written in this movie, or at least in the stuff that we've seen. And then there's that other scene when Superman goes eyes up, whatever he says, right? I found that very interesting. When I first heard that, I thought, well, this is not very Superman-y dialogue. But again, it's Gunn trying to inject some character and personality into Superman. You may argue that that's not really who he is, but then you could argue some of the things that the Cavill Superman does aren't traditionally Superman, either. So if it's right for Cavill to be a little bit modern and different, why isn't it all right for David Corenswet to have a little bit of more personality and vibe about this Superman? This is going to be a very, very different Superman movie. We saw a bit of law tech in this trailer. Lois Lane's recording device, and it was only Grace Randolph pointing it out in her reaction and her Q&A that made me notice this. She's using a Lord Tech recording device. So everyone is using Lord Tech in this universe, in this world, and especially in this movie. But there's an interesting point in the trailer when Lois in the interview says to Superman, "Did you ask the president's permission?" And then it flips over to Lex Luthor. So is Lex Luthor the president in this movie? I didn't think this was the case, but now I'm starting to think that. I wonder if anyone's dared to ask James Gunn that over on Fred's. I don't think he's ready to tell us, but he could be the president and who's also moonlighting over at Luthor Corp doing his nefarious experiments. And it's interesting that Superman is arrested by Rick Flag Sr. and those soldiers. And by the way, the engineer looks awesome and dangerous. I mean, Lex Luthor clearly gets those people to arrest him. But surely, as president, that's how he would have the influence to do that. What do you think of what you've seen and heard about this movie so far? I'm very, very intrigued and excited and can't wait to see it back to back twice on opening day.